The rattling of chains broke the eerie silence of the moonlit night as Florence Parker thrashed against the ropes binding her wrists. Her honey-blonde hair whipping across her dust-streaked face while two men dragged her toward a waiting wagon at the edge of Laredo, Texas. It was 1875, and the border town had seen its share of lawlessness, but nothing had prepared Florence for the betrayal that had led to this moment. "Keep quiet, woman, or you'll get worse than you're already getting," growled the taller of her two captors, a man with a scar running from his eye to his jawline. His companion, shorter and stockier, merely grunted as they hauled her across the hardened earth. Florence's throat was raw from screaming, her once fine blue dress torn at the hem and caked with the red dust of the Texas terrain. 3 days ago, she had been the respectable daughter of a recently deceased banker. Now she was merchandise, sold by her father's business partner to cover debts she hadn't known existed. "Please," she managed, her voice barely audible. "There's been a mistake." The scarred man laughed. "No mistake. Your daddy owed Mr. Hargrove money and now you're paying the debt. Mexican border's just a day's ride away, and there's men who'll pay good money for a pretty white woman." Terror seized Florence's heart. She'd heard whispers about women disappearing across the border, never to be seen again. With renewed desperation, she dug her heels into the dirt, but her captors merely dragged her harder, her boots leaving parallel lines in the dust. The wagon loomed closer, its canvas cover billowing slightly in the night breeze. A third man sat at the driver's seat, his face hidden beneath the shadow of his hat. Florence summoned what remained of her strength for one last attempt to break free when the unmistakable sound of a revolver being cocked cut through the night air. "That's far enough, gentlemen." The voice was deep, steady, and came from somewhere to their left. The men froze, their heads turning toward the source. A figure emerged from behind a cluster of mesquite trees. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to danger. The moonlight caught the silver star pinned to his leather vest. "You're interfering in private business, lawman," the scarred man said, his hand inching toward the pistol at his hip. The newcomer stepped fully into the moonlight, revealing a handsome face weathered by sun and wind, with piercing blue eyes under the brim of his Stetson. "I'm making it my business," he replied, his revolver trained steadily on the scarred man's chest. "Now, I suggest you boys let the lady go." The tense standoff lasted only seconds before the scarred man made his move, reaching for his gun. The shot that followed echoed across the open terrain. The scarred man crumpled to his knees, clutching his shoulder. His companion released Florence and went for his weapon, but the stranger was faster. A second shot rang out, and the stocky man howled as a bullet grazed his arm. "Next one won't miss," the stranger warned. "Now, step away from the lady." The driver of the wagon had already gathered the reins, preparing to flee, but the stranger fired a warning shot over his head. "Don't even think about it." Florence stood trembling, still bound as the stranger approached. With one eye on the wounded men, he holstered his revolver and drew a knife from his boot. With a quick, precise movement, he cut the ropes binding her wrists. "You're free now," he said, his voice gentler than it had been moments before. Florence rubbed her raw wrists, staring up at her rescuer. "Thank you," she whispered, her knees threatening to buckle beneath her. He steadied her with a strong hand on her elbow. "Name's Cole Yates, Deputy Marshal," he introduced himself. "And you are Florence Parker," she replied, wincing as she flexed her fingers to restore circulation. "Miss Parker," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "We need to get these men to the jail. Can you ride?" Before Florence could answer, the scarred man lunged unexpectedly, tackling Cole to the ground. The two men rolled in the dirt, grappling for dominance. Florence backed away, her heart hammering in her chest. Cole landed a solid punch, stunning his attacker long enough to regain his feet. The scarred man followed, drawing a knife from his boot. He slashed wildly and Cole dodged, his movements fluid and practiced. The stocky man began to move toward his fallen pistol, and Florence, acting on instinct, rushed forward and kicked the weapon away. The man snarled and grabbed her ankle, pulling her down. A gunshot cracked through the air. The stocky man released Florence, a look of surprise on his face as he slumped sideways. The wagon driver had fired, not at Cole or Florence, but at his own accomplice. In the confusion, the scarred man broke free from Cole and sprinted toward the wagon. The driver cracked the reins and the horses lurched forward. Cole fired twice, but the wagon was already picking up speed, disappearing into the darkness with the scarred man clinging to its side. Cole helped Florence to her feet. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her entire body ached with exhaustion and fear. "No, but they were going to sell me, across the border." Cole's jaw tightened. "Slave traders, we've been tracking this operation for months." He glanced at the dead man on the ground. "Looks like there's been a falling out among thieves." Florence swayed slightly, the reality of her narrow escape washing over her. Cole caught her arm, steadying her once more. "I've got a horse tied up nearby. Let's get you to town. You can tell me everything at the marshal's office, and we'll find you safe lodging for the night." As they walked toward his horse, Florence cast a wary glance over her shoulder at the empty road where the wagon had disappeared. "Will they come back for me?" Cole's expression was grim as he helped her mount his horse. "Not if I have anything to say about it." He swung up behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he took the reins. "Hold on, Miss Parker. Laredo's just a short ride away." The warmth of his body against her back was reassuring as the horse set off at a steady trot. Florence found herself leaning into his strength, grateful for this strange twist of fate that had brought Cole Yates into her life at the moment she needed him most. Neither of them could have known then how their lives would become irrevocably intertwined in the days to come, or that the danger was far from over. The marshal's office in Laredo was a simple adobe building with bars on the windows and a heavy wooden door. By the time Cole and Florence arrived, the town was quiet, most of its residents having retired for the night. A single lamp burned in the window, casting a yellow glow onto the dusty street. Cole dismounted first, then reached up to help Florence down. Her legs nearly gave way as her feet touched the ground, the events of the past days finally taking their toll. Cole caught her elbow, supporting her weight. "Easy now," he said quietly. "You're safe." Inside, an older man with a silver-streaked beard looked up from his desk. "Cole, wasn't expecting you back so soon." His eyes shifted to Florence, taking in her disheveled appearance and torn dress. "What happened?" "Marshal Thomas, this is Miss Florence Parker. She was being taken by Hargrove's men," Cole explained, guiding Florence to a chair. "I caught up with them about 5 miles south of town." The marshal's bushy eyebrows rose. "Hargrove, Victor Hargrove," Florence nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "He was my father's business partner. After my father died last month, Mr. Hargrove told me there were debts. Substantial debts, but I never imagined he would." Her voice faltered. "Sell you to cover them," Cole finished grimly. Marshal Thomas poured a cup of water and handed it to Florence. She accepted it gratefully, her hands trembling slightly. "Start from the beginning, Miss Parker," the marshal encouraged. "Take your time." Florence took a sip of water, gathering her thoughts. "My father, William Parker, owned the Frontier Bank in San Antonio. We moved there from Boston 5 years ago after my mother passed. Victor Hargrove became his partner shortly after." She paused, the memories painful. When Father died of pneumonia last month, Mr. Hargrove was exceedingly kind, helping with the funeral arrangements, managing the bank's affairs. He told me Father had made some poor investments, that the bank was in trouble. Cole leaned against the desk, his eyes never leaving Florence's face. And you believed him? I had no reason not to, Florence replied. Father had taught me about banking, but he kept the details of his business private. 3 days ago, Mr. Hargrove came to the house with those 2 men, claiming they were taking me to stay with his sister in Austin until the financial matters were settled. But we headed south, not north. When I realized something was wrong, she swallowed hard. They bound me and told me I was payment for my father's debts. Marshal Thomas exchanged a grim look with Cole. We've suspected Hargrove of being involved in a trafficking ring for some time, but we've never had enough evidence. He's careful, keeps his hands clean. Not this time, Cole said. I recognized one of the men from wanted posters. Jeb McCain, known associate of the Salazar gang. They operate on both sides of the border. The other man got away, Florence added. With the driver, Cole nodded. In a wagon headed south. I wounded McCain before he escaped. The marshal sighed heavily. This could be what we need to finally bring Hargrove down, but it won't be easy. He's a powerful man with connections all the way to the state capitol. Florence straightened in her chair. I'll testify against him. He tried to sell me like cattle. My father trusted him. That's brave of you, Miss Parker, Cole said softly, but also dangerous. Hargrove won't take this lightly. Cole's right, the marshal agreed. We need to keep you somewhere safe until we can build a case. Where? Florence asked. I can't return to San Antonio. The marshal stroked his beard thoughtfully. Mrs. Hollister runs a respectable boarding house. She's trustworthy and her place is just down the street from the office here. We can keep an eye on you there. Cole shook his head. Too obvious. Hargrove will have men looking for her in town. What do you suggest? Marshal Thomas asked. Cole was quiet for a moment, considering. My sister's place outside of town. Catherine's husband is away on a cattle drive and she could use the company. It's isolated, defensible, and few people know of my connection to it. The marshal nodded slowly. Might work. What do you think, Miss Parker? Florence looked between the 2 men, weighing her limited options. I'm grateful for any safe haven you can provide, Deputy Yates. Cole, he corrected with a small smile. If we're going to be hiding you at my sister's ranch, I think we can dispense with formalities. Something in his gentle tone made Florence's cheeks warm. Cole, then. It's settled, Marshal Thomas said, rising from his desk. You'll head out at first light. For tonight, I think the jail cell is actually the safest place for you, Miss Parker. It locks from the outside, and Cole or I will be here all night. Florence nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Thank you both. I don't know what would have happened if. She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Cole's expression darkened. But it didn't, and it won't. I give you my word. Marshal Thomas showed Florence to the small cell at the back of the office. It was sparsely furnished with a cot, thin blanket, and a wash basin. It's not much, he apologized, but it's secure. It's perfect, Florence assured him, sinking onto the cot. After the marshal left, Cole approached the cell with a folded shirt in his hands. It's clean, he said, passing it through the bars. Might be more comfortable to sleep in than that dress. Florence accepted the offered garment, touched by the thoughtful gesture. Thank you. Cole lingered for a moment, his blue eyes studying her face. Get some rest, Florence. Tomorrow will be a long day. As he turned to leave, Florence called after him softly. Cole, he paused, looking back at her. Yes. Why did you follow those men tonight? How did you know? A shadow crossed his face. I didn't know it was you specifically. We've been tracking Hargrove's operation for months. Tonight, I was following a lead about a transport heading south. His expression softened, but I'm glad it led me to you. With that, he returned to the front of the office, leaving Florence alone with her thoughts and the simple comfort of his shirt clutched in her hands. She changed quickly, folding her torn dress carefully despite its condition. Cole's shirt hung loosely on her frame, the sleeves extending well past her fingertips, but the fabric was soft against her skin. As she lay down on the narrow cot, pulling the thin blanket over her, Florence realized it was the first time in 3 days she felt truly safe. Sleep claimed her almost instantly, her dreams mercifully empty of the horrors she had narrowly escaped. Dawn broke over Lerdo, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Florence awoke disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings momentarily confusing her until the events of the previous night came rushing back. She sat up on the cot, running a hand through her tangled hair. Cole was already awake, his back to her as he spoke in hushed tones with Marshal Thomas at the front desk. They both turned as she rose, the cell door creaking slightly as she approached the bars. "Good morning," Cole greeted her, crossing the room to unlock the cell. "Did you sleep well?" Florence nodded, suddenly conscious of her appearance in his oversized shirt. "Better than I expected. Thank you." Marshal Thomas cleared his throat. "I've arranged for some suitable clothing for your journey. Mrs. Hollister was kind enough to provide them without asking too many questions." A bundle sat on the desk, tied with simple twine. Florence accepted it gratefully. "Your kindness is overwhelming." "It's nothing," the marshal assured her. "Cole will take you to his sister's place once you're ready. I've sent a deputy to San Antonio to gather information on Hargrove's activities, but it'll take time to build a case." Florence retreated to the cell to change, finding a practical riding skirt, blouse, and sturdy boots in the bundle. The clothes were slightly large but serviceable. She used the small mirror above the wash basin to attempt to tame her hair, twisting it into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. When she emerged, Cole was waiting with a cup of coffee and a plate of beans and biscuits. "It's not fancy, but it's hot," he said, gesturing to the simple meal. Florence hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma of food reached her. She ate quickly, the plain fare tasting better than any fine meal she could remember. As she finished, Cole handed her a leather hat with a wide brim. "For the sun," he explained. "It's a long ride to Catherine's place." Outside, 2 horses were tethered to the hitching post, Cole's bay gelding from the night before and a gentle-looking chestnut mare. Cole helped Florence mount the chestnut, adjusting the stirrups for her height. "Her name's Penny," he said, patting the mare's neck. "She's even-tempered, won't give you any trouble." Florence stroked the horse's mane, grateful for the animal's calm demeanor. It had been years since she'd ridden regularly, a pastime she'd enjoyed in her youth back east. They set off as the town was just beginning to stir, taking a winding path that avoided the main roads. Cole rode slightly ahead, his posture alert, one hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. "How far is your sister's ranch?" Florence asked as they cleared the outskirts of Lerdo. "About 15 miles northeast," Cole replied, glancing back at her. "Isolated enough to be safe, but close enough to town if we need supplies." The Texas landscape stretched before them, vast and open under the climbing sun. Despite the circumstances, Florence found herself admiring the wild beauty of the terrain, so different from the manicured gardens of Boston or the crowded streets of San Antonio. "Have you lived in Lerdo long?" she inquired, eager to know more about the man who had saved her life. Cole adjusted his hat against the sun's glare. "Born and raised, My father ran cattle on the land where Catherine lives now. When he passed, we split the property. I sold my portion to buy a smaller spread closer to town when I took the deputy position 5 years ago. And your sister? Married Tom Holloway 3 years back. He manages the ranch with a few hands. Good man, honest. He's up north with a herd right now, due back in a couple of weeks. Florence considered this information. Is your sister expecting me? Cole's lips quirked in a half smile. Sent a ranch hand ahead at first light with a message. Catherine's used to my surprises. She was none too pleased when I joined the marshal's service, thought it was too dangerous. It is dangerous, Florence observed, thinking of the previous night's confrontation. Cole shrugged. Someone has to stand between decent folks and men like Hargrove. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a hawk the only interruptions. Florence found her thoughts drifting to her father, wondering if he had known the true nature of his business partner. The William Parker she had known was a principled man who valued honesty above all else. Had he been deceived, or had he made compromises she couldn't understand? Around midday, they stopped in the shade of a large oak tree near a small creek. Cole helped Florence dismount, his strong hands at her waist sending an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "We'll rest here for a bit. Let the horses drink," he said, seemingly oblivious to her reaction. Florence nodded, stretching her legs while Cole led the horses to water. She was unaccustomed to long rides, and her muscles protested the extended time in the saddle. Cole returned with a small cloth bundle, which he unwrapped to reveal beef jerky, hard cheese, and a couple of apples. "Not exactly a fancy restaurant meal," he apologized, offering her a share. "It's perfect," Florence assured him, accepting the food gratefully. She settled on a flat rock near the creek, watching as Cole checked their surroundings with practiced vigilance before joining her. "Do you think they're looking for me?" she asked after a moment. Cole met her gaze directly. "Yes, Hargrove won't give up easily. You're not just a lost investment to him now, you're a threat." Florence shivered despite the warmth of the day. "Because I can testify against him." "Exactly." "But don't worry," Cole added, his voice softening. "Catherine's place is well off the main trails. You'll be safe there while we build our case." "And how long will that take?" Cole sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly, I don't know. Hargrove's careful. He's been operating for years without leaving enough evidence for an arrest. Your testimony helps, but we need more to ensure he can't wiggle free." Florence fell silent, contemplating a future in hiding, dependent on the protection of strangers. It wasn't how she had envisioned her life after her father's death. She had expected to sell the family home in San Antonio, perhaps return to Boston where distant relatives remained, or even stay and manage her father's affairs if possible. "What will happen to my father's bank?" she asked suddenly. Cole frowned. "I'm not sure. If Hargrove was embezzling funds or using the bank for illegal activities, it might already be in trouble. The marshal will look into it." "Everything my father worked for," Florence murmured, a wave of sadness washing over her. "All gone." Cole reached out, his hand covering hers briefly. "Not everything. You're still here, and we'll find justice for him." The unexpected gesture of comfort made Florence's heart skip a beat. She looked up to find Cole watching her, his blue eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that surprised her. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was prepared to name. Then Cole cleared his throat and stood, breaking the spell. "We should get moving," he said, gathering the remains of their meal. "Still have a ways to go." They continued their journey, the terrain becoming more rugged as they moved northeast. The open plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with mesquite and oak. In the distance, Florence could see the silvery ribbon of a river winding through the landscape. Noose's River, Cole explained, following her gaze. Catherine's place is just beyond that ridge ahead. Good water, good grazing land. As they crested the hill, a modest ranch spread out below them. A main house of whitewashed adobe stood in a clearing, surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn. A thin plume of smoke rose from the chimney, and a few cattle grazed in a nearby pasture. "It's lovely," Florence said honestly, taking in the peaceful scene. Cole nodded, a note of pride in his voice. "It's not grand, but it's good land. Catherine and Tom have built something solid here." They rode down toward the ranch, and as they approached, the front door of the house opened. A woman emerged, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Even from a distance, the family resemblance was clear. She had Cole's same straight posture and confident bearing. Catherine Holloway was perhaps a few years older than Florence, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, and the same striking blue eyes as her brother. As they drew closer, Florence could see she was pregnant, her condition evident beneath her simple dress. "Cole Yates, you've got some explaining to do," Catherine called out, though her tone was more amused than angry. "Your message said you were bringing a guest who needed shelter, not why or for how long." Cole dismounted and helped Florence down before embracing his sister. "Cat, this is Florence Parker. Florence, my sister Catherine." Catherine's sharp gaze softened as she took in Florence's appearance. "You look like you've had a rough time of it, Miss Parker. Please call me Florence," she replied. "And yes, I have. Your brother saved my life." Catherine shot Cole a questioning look. "Another one of your strays, little brother." Cole's expression turned serious. "This is different, Cat." "Florence was being trafficked by Victor Hargrove. She's a witness who can help us bring him down, but she needs a safe place to stay until we build our case." Catherine's eyes widened. "Hargrove, the banker. I've heard Tom mention him has investments in half the cattle operations between here and San Antonio." She turned to Florence with newfound understanding. "You poor thing. Come inside. You must be exhausted." The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with handcrafted furniture and colorful woven rugs. A large fireplace dominated the main room, and the smell of something savory simmering filled the air. "Sit, both of you," Catherine instructed, gesturing to the table. "I'll fetch some coffee." As she bustled about the kitchen, Cole explained their situation in more detail. Catherine listened intently, her expression growing more concerned. "How dangerous is this, Cole?" she asked finally. "I have the baby to think about, and with Tom away." Cole met his sister's worried gaze. "I wouldn't have brought Florence here if I thought it would put you at risk. The ranch is remote, and no one connects it to me officially since I sold my share." "But if you're uncomfortable—" "No," Catherine interrupted firmly. "Of course she can stay. I was just asking." She turned to Florence with a warm smile. "It'll be nice to have another woman around, especially with Tom gone. The ranch hands are good men, but they're not much for conversation." Relief flooded through Florence. "Thank you. I promise I won't be a burden. I can help with chores, cooking, whatever you need." Catherine patted her hand. "We'll figure all that out tomorrow. For now, you need rest. I'll show you to the guest room after dinner." As the evening progressed, Florence found herself warming to Catherine's straightforward manner and kind heart. The siblings shared an easy rapport, teasing each other and sharing stories that gave Florence glimpses into their childhood on this very land. After dinner, Catherine showed Florence to a small but clean room at the back of the house. "It's not fancy," she apologized, "but the bed's comfortable." "It's perfect," Florence assured her, echoing what she had said about the jail cell, though this accommodations were vastly superior. "I can't thank you enough." Left alone, Florence sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the past few days finally catching up with her. She was safe for now, but her future remained uncertain. Her life in San Antonio was effectively over, her father's legacy in the hands of a criminal, and she was dependent on the kindness of strangers. Yet as she thought of Cole Yates, his steady presence, his unwavering determination to see justice done, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, with his help, she could reclaim some part of the life that had been stolen from her. With that thought providing comfort, Florence prepared for bed, grateful for the simple sanctuary of clean sheets and solid walls between her and the dangers that lurked beyond. In the main room, Cole and Catherine spoke in hushed tones. "How long do you think she'll need to stay?" Catherine asked, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Cole sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. Could be weeks, maybe longer. Hargrove has connections, influence. Building a case against him won't be easy. And the girl, what happens to her after?" Cole glanced toward the closed door of the guest room. "That's up to her. If we can recover her father's assets, prove Hargrove was embezzling, she might have something to return to in San Antonio. If not—" He trailed off, leaving the uncertainty hanging between them. Catherine studied her brother's face, a knowing look in her eyes. "You like her?" Cole straightened. "I'm doing my job, Cat, MMHMM," his sister hummed, unconvinced. "I saw how you looked at her during dinner. You've never brought anyone to the ranch before, not even when that outlaw gang was after Jennings last year." "This is different," Cole insisted. "Florence is an innocent caught up in something ugly. She needs protection." Catherine smiled softly. "If you say so, little brother." She rose with a slight wince, her pregnancy making movements more difficult. "I'm turning in. Will you be staying the night?" Cole nodded. "I'll sleep in the barn. Need to head back to town in the morning, report to Marshal Thomas." He caught his sister's arm gently. "Thank you for this, Cat. I wouldn't have asked if there was another way." Catherine's expression softened. "I know. Just be careful, Cole, both for your sake and hers." As Catherine retired to her room, Cole stepped outside onto the porch, his gaze scanning the darkening landscape out of habit. The ranch was quiet, peaceful in a way that always settled something inside him when he visited. It had been his home for 20 years before the badge, before he'd chosen a different path than the one his father had laid out for him. His thoughts turned to Florence, to the courage she'd shown in the face of unimaginable betrayal and fear. There was a quiet strength in her that impressed him, a resilience beneath her refined exterior that spoke of depths yet to be discovered. Catherine was right, he did like her. More than was wise, given the circumstances. But Cole had long ago learned to keep his feelings in check, to put duty before personal desires. Florence Parker needed a protector right now, not a suitor. With that firmly in mind, he headed toward the barn for what would likely be a restless night. The next morning, Florence awoke to the sounds of the ranch coming to life, roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, the clank of pails and the murmur of men's voices as the ranch hands began their day. She dressed quickly in the clothes Mrs. Hollister had provided, grateful for their practicality. Her own fine dresses would have been woefully unsuited to ranch life. As she pinned up her hair, Florence caught her reflection in the small mirror hanging on the wall. Already, there was more color in her cheeks, a clarity in her eyes that had been absent during the ordeal with Hargrove's men. In the kitchen, she found Catherine kneading dough at the table, her movements practiced despite her advanced pregnancy. "Good morning," Florence greeted her. "Can I help with anything?" Catherine looked up with a smile. "You're an early riser. There's coffee on the stove if you'd like some. And yes, you can slice those apples for pies if you don't mind. The hands work better when they're well fed." Florence set to work, finding comfort in the simple domestic task. "Has Cole left already?" "Just after dawn," Catherine confirmed. "He needed to get back to town, but he'll return in a few days to check on us." She glanced at Florence. "He was quite concerned about your safety." Florence felt her cheeks warm slightly. "He's been very kind. You both have." Catherine waved off the thanks. "Family helps family and friends help friends. That's how we survive out here." She paused, studying Florence. "Cole mentioned your father was a banker in San Antonio." "Yes," Florence nodded, focusing on the apple in her hands. "He owned Frontier Bank. We moved from Boston after my mother died, looking for a fresh start. And this man Hargrove was his partner." Florence's knife stilled momentarily. "Yes, I thought he was a friend. After father died, he seemed so helpful, managing the bank's affairs, helping with funeral arrangements. I had no reason to suspect." She trailed off, the betrayal still raw. Catherine's expression softened with understanding. "Men like that prey on trust. My father lost half his herd once to a smooth, talking cattle buyer with forged bank drafts. It nearly ruined us." "What did you do?" Florence asked, resuming her slicing. "Survived. Adapted. Pa worked twice as hard and Cole and I pitched in more. Eventually we rebuilt." Catherine pressed the dough into a pie tin. "Life out here teaches you resilience. Just when you think you're beaten, you find strength you didn't know you had." The words resonated with Florence, stirring something deep inside her. She had been raised to be a banker's daughter, educated in the social graces and basic accounting, but sheltered from life's harsher realities. Now, thrust into danger and uncertainty, she would need to find that hidden strength Catherine spoke of. The day passed in a blur of activity as Florence learned the rhythms of ranch life. Catherine proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to collect eggs without upsetting the hens, churn butter, and tend the vegetable garden that provided much of their produce. By evening, Florence's hands were sore and her back ached from unaccustomed labor. But she felt a sense of accomplishment that had been missing from her more genteel life in San Antonio. As they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Florence found herself opening up to Catherine about her fears. "What if we can't prove what Hargrove did? What if he's already sold the bank, taken everything my father worked for?" Catherine considered this, her hand resting on her rounded belly. "Then you start over, with the knowledge and skills you still possess. Your father's legacy isn't just a building or accounts, it's what he taught you, the person he raised you to be." Florence mulled this over, finding unexpected comfort in the perspective. "I never thought I'd have to be this resilient. My life was planned out managing the household, eventually marrying someone suitable, continuing in the circles my father had established. And now—" Catherine prompted gently. "Now," Florence gazed at the darkening landscape. "Now I don't know, everything's changed." "Not everything," Catherine corrected. "You're still you, just maybe a stronger version than you knew existed." The days at the ranch fell into a pattern. Florence threw herself into learning every aspect of ranch life, finding satisfaction in mastering new skills. She helped Catherine with cooking and preserving, learned to milk the cows, and even convinced one of the ranch hands to teach her to ride properly, something she hadn't done since childhood in Boston. A week passed with no word from Cole, then another. Florence tried not to worry, telling herself he was busy building the case against Hargrove, but she found her thoughts turning to him often. She would catch herself watching the road, hoping to see his familiar figure approaching on horseback. Catherine noticed, of course. "He'll be back when he can," she assured Florence one evening as they shelled peas on the porch. "The marshal probably has him running all over the county gathering evidence." "I know," Florence replied, trying to sound unconcerned. "I just hope he's being careful. Hargrove is dangerous." Catherine gave her a knowing look, but didn't press further. On the morning of the 17th day at the ranch, Florence was in the chicken coop collecting eggs when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Hurrying outside, she shaded her eyes against the sun, her heart leaping at the sight of Cole riding toward the house. But her joy quickly turned to concern. Even from a distance, she could see he was slumped in the saddle, his usual straight posture absent. As he drew closer, she gasped at the sight of blood staining his shirt. "Catherine," she called, already running toward him. "Cole's hurt." Catherine emerged from the house as Cole reached the yard. He attempted to dismount but staggered, nearly falling. Florence reached him just in time, bracing herself under his arm as his legs threatened to give way. "What happened?" she demanded, helping him toward the house. "Ambush," Cole managed through gritted teeth. "Two of Hargrove's men, waiting for me outside of town." Catherine held the door open, her face pale with worry. "Get him to the table," she instructed Florence. "I'll fetch the medical supplies." Together, they eased Cole onto the sturdy kitchen table. Florence's hands trembled as she helped him remove his blood-soaked shirt, revealing a deep gash across his left shoulder and an ugly bruise blooming on his ribs. "Not as bad as it looks," Cole assured them, though his pained expression belied his words. "Knife caught me when I was fighting them off. Missed anything vital." Catherine returned with a box of medical supplies and a bottle of whiskey. "Drink," she ordered, handing him the bottle. "This is going to hurt." Cole took a long swallow, then another, while Catherine threaded a needle. "Florence, I need you to hold him steady," she instructed. "This needs stitching." Florence positioned herself at Cole's uninjured side, one hand on his good shoulder, the other gripping his hand. Their eyes met, and she saw pain but also something softer there. "Some escort I turned out to be," he murmured, attempting a smile. "Hush," Florence replied, squeezing his hand. "Just hold still." Catherine worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with alcohol that made Cole hiss through clenched teeth, then stitching the gash closed with neat, practiced movements. "Where did you learn to do that?" Florence asked, impressed despite her concern. "When you grow up on a ranch 15 miles from town, you learn to handle injuries," Catherine explained, tying off the last stitch. "Pa made sure Cole and I both knew basic doctoring." Once the wound was bandaged, they helped Cole to the spare bedroom Florence's room for the past 2 weeks. "I'll make up a bed in the main room," Florence offered, but Cole shook his head. "No need to give up your comfort. I can sleep in the bunkhouse with the hands." "Don't be ridiculous," Catherine scolded. "You're not going anywhere with that shoulder." "Florence can take my room and I'll bunk with you tonight to make sure you don't develop a fever." Cole knew better than to argue with his sister. Once he was settled, Catherine pulled Florence aside. "He's lucky. The cut is deep but clean. As long as infection doesn't set in, he should heal fine." She paused, her expression grave. "But Florence, this changes things. If Hargrove's men are bold enough to attack a deputy marshal, they're desperate. You're not safe here anymore." Fear clutched at Florence's heart. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need a new plan. Once Cole is strong enough to travel, you both need to go somewhere Hargrove won't think to look." Catherine sighed, one hand absently stroking her belly. "I hate to say it, but your presence here endangers not just you but all of us." Though the words stung, Florence knew Catherine was right. "I'm so sorry, I never meant to bring trouble to your door." Catherine's expression softened. "This isn't your fault, it's Hargrove's, and Cole's too, for being too stubborn to ask for help when he needs it." She squeezed Florence's arm. "Get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow, figure out what to do next." Sleep eluded Florence that night, despite the comfort of Catherine's bed. Her thoughts raced between concern for Cole, fear of Hargrove's men finding the ranch, and guilt at having brought danger to this peaceful place. By dawn, she had made a decision. If her presence endangered the ranch, there was only one solution. She would leave. Alone, Cole awoke to sunlight streaming through the window and the familiar scent of his childhood room. For a moment, disoriented by pain and the lingering effects of whiskey, he thought he was a boy again, recovering from a fall during a wild horse breaking. Then reality crashed back: the ambush outside of Lerdo, the desperate ride to the ranch, Florence's worried face as she'd helped him inside. He attempted to sit up, a mistake that sent pain lancing through his shoulder. Gritting his teeth, he managed to swing his legs over the side of the bed just as the door opened and Catherine entered with a steaming cup. "Where's Florence?" he asked immediately, noting his sister's troubled expression. Catherine handed him the coffee. "Gone. Took one of the horses before dawn, left this." She held out a folded paper. Cole snatched it, dread settling in his stomach as he read. "Dear Catherine and Cole, I cannot continue to put you in danger because of my troubles. Cole's injury makes it clear that Hargrove will stop at nothing, and I cannot bear the thought of bringing harm to either of you or the baby. I've borrowed a horse and some supplies. Please don't follow me. I have a plan to reach the authorities in San Antonio directly. By the time you read this, I'll be well on my way. With deepest gratitude, Florence." Cole cursed, crumpling the paper. "How long ago did she leave?" 3, maybe 4 hours, Catherine replied. Miguel noticed Daisy was missing from the corral when he started chores at dawn. He found her bedroll and some provisions gone too. Cole was already reaching for his shirt, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "Which direction?" "Cole, you're in no condition to ride," Catherine protested. "Which direction?" he repeated, his voice hard with urgency. Catherine sighed, knowing better than to argue when her brother had that look. "South, according to Pedro." He was checking the fence line at first light and saw a rider headed that way. "Towards San Antonio," Cole muttered, "straight into Hargrove's territory." He forced himself to stand, swaying slightly. "I need a fresh horse." "You need sense knocked into you," Catherine retorted, but she was already moving to help him dress. "At least eat something first. You won't help her if you pass out in the saddle." 20 minutes later, Cole was mounted on Catherine's fastest horse, his wound rebandaged and his saddlebags packed with food and medical supplies. His sister stood in the yard, her expression a mixture of worry and resignation. "If you die chasing after that girl, I'll never forgive you," she told him. Cole managed a pained smile. "I don't plan on dying today, Cat." "Good." She handed him a canteen. "Because I think she's worth keeping alive for." Before Cole could respond to that loaded statement, Catherine stepped back. "Go on, then." "But Cole," her voice softened, "be careful, both of you." With a nod, Cole urged the horse into a gallop, heading south. Florence had a good head start, but she wasn't familiar with the terrain, and he knew every trail and shortcut between the ranch and San Antonio. As he rode, Cole tried to make sense of Florence's actions. Her note spoke of protecting them, but running straight toward Hargrove made no sense unless she wasn't actually going to San Antonio. What if the note was meant to be found by the wrong people? What if she was setting a false trail? The possibility gave him pause. Florence was smart. She'd proven that repeatedly during her time at the ranch. If she'd suspected Hargrove might have men watching the ranch, leaving a misleading note would be a clever move. But where would she actually go? Cole considered what he knew about her. She was resourceful, determined, and had spent the past 2 weeks learning everything she could about surviving in this harsh land. If she wasn't heading to San Antonio, where would she feel safe? The answer came to him suddenly, so obvious he nearly laughed despite the pain in his shoulder. Changing direction, he urged his horse toward the east, toward the one place Florence had expressed interest in during their conversations at the ranch, the abandoned mission Catherine had mentioned, where their mother had been born. Florence had asked detailed questions about its location, its history, ostensibly out of curiosity about the Yates family heritage. But now Cole wondered if she'd been memorizing directions to a potential refuge, just in case. It was a gamble, but his instincts rarely led him astray. And right now, every fiber of his being told him Florence was in grave danger, whether she realized it or not. Florence guided the borrowed mare along a narrow deer trail, careful to stay under the cover of trees when possible. She had indeed left a false trail heading south before doubling back and heading east, toward the old Spanish mission Catherine had described during their evening conversations. The mission had been abandoned for decades, Catherine had said, but the stone walls still stood, offering shelter to occasional travelers or those seeking solitude. It was isolated, difficult to find unless you knew where to look, and importantly, not connected to either the Holloway Ranch or the Yates name in any official capacity. Florence had memorized Catherine's directions carefully, sensing even then that she might someday need a refuge beyond the ranch. Her plan was simple: hide at the mission for a few days, then make her way to the nearest town with a telegraph office. From there, she could contact federal authorities directly about Hargrove's operation, bypassing local officials who might be in his pocket. It was risky, but less dangerous than staying at the ranch and drawing Hargrove's men to Cole's family. The thought of Cole's wound made her heart clench. He had already suffered because of her. She couldn't bear to bring more harm to him or his sister. The sun climbed higher in the sky, baking the exposed parts of the trail. Florence had filled her canteen at a creek earlier, but she drank sparingly, unsure when she would find water again. Catherine had taught her to recognize certain plants that indicated underground springs, but so far, she had seen none. By midday, Florence estimated she had traveled perhaps 10 miles. The terrain had grown increasingly rocky, dotted with scrubby mesquite and occasional stands of live oak. According to Catherine, the mission should be nestled in a small valley, just beyond a distinctive ridge shaped like a sleeping dog. Pausing to rest the horse in the shade of an ancient oak, Florence scanned the horizon. The ridge was visible in the distance, perhaps another hour's ride. Relief flooded through her. She would reach the mission before nightfall. As she remounted, a flicker of movement in her peripheral vision made her freeze. Turning slowly, she peered through the heat haze rippling across the landscape. Nothing. Just rocks and brush and the occasional bird taking flight. Still, unease prickled along her spine. Since leaving the ranch, Florence had felt increasingly certain she was being watched, followed. She had dismissed it as paranoia, the natural anxiety of a woman alone in the wilderness. But now she wasn't so sure. Urging the mare forward at a slightly faster pace, Florence kept to the tree line whenever possible, her eyes constantly scanning her surroundings. The landscape seemed to hold its breath, unnaturally still in the afternoon heat. When the shot came, it seemed to split the silence like a thunderclap. The bullet whizzed past her head, close enough that she felt the disturbed air against her cheek. The mare reared in panic, and Florence clung desperately to the saddle horn, fighting to stay mounted. "That was a warning, Miss Parker," a voice called from somewhere to her left. "The next one won't miss." Florence's blood ran cold. She recognized that voice, the scarred man from the night Cole had rescued her. Somehow, Hargrove's men had found her. She had two choices: surrender or run. The mare was fast, but could she outpace bullets? The mission was still too far to reach before they caught her. The decision was made for her when two riders emerged from behind a rocky outcropping to her right, cutting off her escape route. The scarred man, his shoulder still bandaged from Cole's bullet, and another man she didn't recognize. "End of the road, Miss Parker," the scarred man called, a cruel smile twisting his features. "Mr. Hargrove is mighty eager to see you again." Florence straightened in the saddle, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I have nothing to say to Mr. Hargrove except in a courtroom." The men laughed. "There won't be any courtroom for you, miss. Hargrove has other plans." The second man uncoiled a rope from his saddle. "Now, are you coming quietly or do we need to get rough?" Florence glanced between them, calculating distances, options. They were armed, she was not. They knew the terrain. She was still learning it. Running meant almost certain capture or worse. But surrender meant a return to the fate she had narrowly escaped once before. As the men advanced slowly, confident in their advantage, Florence made her decision. In one swift movement, she wheeled the mare around and dug her heels into the horse's flanks, urging her toward the only opening available, a steep trail leading up into the rocky hillside to her left. Shouts erupted behind her, followed by the thunder of hoofbeats. Another shot rang out, this one deliberately wide. They wanted her alive. The mare scrambled up the rocky incline, sure-footed despite the terrain. Florence leaned forward in the saddle, making herself as small a target as possible. If she could reach the top of the ridge, perhaps she could lose them in the maze of ravines Catherine had described on the other side. A bullet ricocheted off a rock near her head, showering her with stone fragments. Florence ducked lower, her heart hammering against her ribs. The mare's breathing came in labored gasps as they climbed higher, the pursuit close behind. They were nearly to the crest when disaster struck. The mare's hoof slipped on loose shale, and the horse stumbled, throwing Florence forward against her neck. She managed to stay mounted, but the brief loss of momentum allowed her pursuers to gain ground. As they crested the ridge, Florence saw with despair that the trail ahead narrowed to a precarious ledge along a steep drop. To continue would be suicide for both her and the horse. She reined in, frantically searching for another path, but it was too late. The scarred man and his companion had reached the top of the ridge, effectively trapping her. "Nowhere to run now," the scarred man called, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Come along quietly, and we won't have to hurt you." Florence's mind raced. She could not go back to Hargrove. Death seemed preferable to the fate that awaited her across the Mexican border. The mare shifted nervously beneath her, sensing her distress. The edge of the cliff was just feet away, a sheer drop to the rocks below. "Last chance, Miss Parker," the scarred man warned, dismounting and approaching on foot, rope in hand. Florence closed her eyes briefly, gathering her courage. She would not surrender, not while she had breath in her body. Opening her eyes, she prepared to urge the mare forward, toward the narrow ledge, a desperate gamble, but the only one left to her. Before she could act, a shot echoed across the ridge, followed immediately by another. The scarred man crumpled to the ground. His companion reached for his weapon, but a third shot sent him tumbling from his saddle. Florence sat frozen in shock, uncertain what new danger had arrived. Then, from behind an outcropping of rocks to her right, a figure emerged, revolver still raised. "Cole," she breathed, relief flooding through her. He lowered his weapon, his face grim as he approached. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. She shook her head, words momentarily beyond her. He reached her side, his hand coming to rest on the mare's neck, steadying the nervous animal. "How did you find me?" Florence finally managed. "I know these hills," Cole replied simply. And I know you're smarter than to head straight for San Antonio." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The mission was a good choice for a hiding place. Florence glanced at the men on the ground. The scarred man wasn't moving, but his companion was groaning, clutching his arm where Cole's bullet had found its mark. "Are they?" She couldn't finish the question. "That one's dead," Cole confirmed, nodding toward the scarred man. "The other's just wounded. We'll take him back to Laredo, see what he knows about Hargrove's operation." He winced slightly as he moved to secure the wounded man, his own injury clearly paining him. "You shouldn't be riding," Florence admonished, suddenly remembering his condition. "Your wound could reopen." Cole's expression softened. "And you shouldn't have run off alone. We're supposed to be protecting each other, remember?" The simple statement touched something deep inside Florence. Not just the acknowledgement that she too had something to offer in their partnership, but the implication that they were in this together, equals despite their different backgrounds and experiences. "I was trying to protect you and Catherine," she explained. "After what happened to you. I know." Cole stepped closer, his hand moving from the horse to rest lightly on her arm. "But Florence, running away wasn't the answer. We're stronger together." The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. For a moment they simply looked at each other, a multitude of unspoken words hanging in the air between them. Then Cole cleared his throat, stepping back. "We should go. It'll be dark soon, and we're still a few hours from the mission." "Can you ride?" Florence nodded, gathering the mare's reins. "What about him?" she asked, gesturing to the wounded man who was now sitting up, glaring at them. "He'll ride with me," Cole said grimly, "after I make sure he can't cause any more trouble." As Cole secured the prisoner to his own horse, Florence watched, a new resolve settling over her. She had been running from Hargrove, from her fears, even from her growing feelings for the man who had twice now saved her life. But no more. It was time to stand and fight, not just for justice against Hargrove, but for the future she was beginning to envision, one very different from the life she had expected in San Antonio, and all the more precious for it. The old mission appeared like a mirage as they crested the final hill, its weathered stone walls glowing golden in the light of the setting sun. Despite its abandoned state, the building retained a dignified presence, a testament to the faith and determination of those who had built it nearly a century before. They had ridden in silence for most of the journey, Cole leading with the wounded man secured to his horse, Florence following on the tired mare. The prisoner, who had eventually identified himself as Lester Quinn, had alternated between sullen silence and threats about what Hargrove would do when he learned of their location. Cole had largely ignored him, his focus divided between watching for any sign of additional pursuers and checking on Florence. The concern in his eyes each time he glanced back at her made her heart beat a little faster, though she tried not to read too much into it. He was a lawman doing his job, protecting a witness, nothing more. Yet the memory of his words on the ridge, "We're stronger together," lingered in her mind, warming her even as the evening air grew cool. The mission's courtyard was overgrown with weeds, but the chapel roof appeared intact, and the adjacent priest's quarters still had a door that could be secured. Cole dismounted carefully, favoring his injured shoulder, and helped Florence down from the mare. "It's not exactly the Grand Hotel," he said with a wry smile, "but it'll do for tonight." "It's perfect," Florence replied honestly. After the terror of the day's pursuit and the exhaustion of the ride, any shelter seemed luxurious. They secured the horses in what had once been a stable, then led their prisoner into the chapel. Cole bound Quinn to one of the sturdy wooden pews, checking the knots twice. "Try to get some rest," he told Florence. "I'll take first watch." She wanted to protest, to insist he needed rest more than she did with his injury, but the determined set of his jaw told her it would be futile. Instead, she nodded, retreating to the small room adjacent to the chapel that had once served as the priest's quarters. The room contained little more than a wooden frame that had once held a mattress and a rickety table, but it was shelter from the elements and offered a modicum of privacy. Florence spread her bedroll on the frame and sat down, listening to the sounds of Cole moving about in the chapel. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. The day's events played on repeat in her mind: the pursuit, the moment of despair at the cliff's edge, Cole's timely arrival. She had come so close to capture, perhaps even death. Rising, she moved to the doorway, peering into the chapel. Cole sat on a pew across from their prisoner, his revolver resting on his thigh. Quinn appeared to be sleeping, his head lolled to one side, but Cole remained vigilant, his posture alert despite the obvious pain in his shoulder. "You should be resting," Florence said softly, stepping into the chapel. Cole looked up, a tired smile touching his lips. "So should you." She crossed to sit beside him, careful to leave a respectable distance between them. "I can't sleep. Too much happened today." Cole nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It was a close call." "Too close," Florence agreed. "If you hadn't come when you did." She shuddered at the thought. "But I did," Cole said simply. "And now we have one of Hargrove's men who might be persuaded to testify against him." Florence glanced at Quinn. "Do you think he will?" When faced with hanging for his part in a trafficking operation, "I think he might suddenly discover a desire to cooperate." Cole's voice hardened. "Men like Quinn don't have loyalty, just self-interest." They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, the only sounds the soft whistling of wind through the chapel's empty window frames and Quinn's occasional snore. "Why did you become a deputy marshal?" Florence asked suddenly, curious about the man beside her. Cole considered the question. "My father expected me to take over the ranch when he died. It was the path laid out for me since birth." He paused, his gaze distant. "But when I was 16, a gang came through Lerdo. They shot the sheriff when he tried to stop them from robbing the bank, killed 2 others before they were done. I watched it happen from across the street, too far away to help." Florence listened, captivated by this glimpse into his past. "The marshal organized a posse to go after them. My father wouldn't let me join, said I was too young, had responsibilities at the ranch. But I couldn't forget what I'd seen, the injustice of it." Cole's voice softened with memory. "When I turned 20, I rode into Lerdo and asked Marshal Thomas for a job. Been wearing the badge ever since." "Your father must have been disappointed," Florence observed. A wry smile crossed Cole's face. "Furious is more accurate. Didn't speak to me for nearly a year. But he came around eventually, especially after I helped recover some cattle that had been rustled from a neighboring ranch. And you've never regretted your choice." Cole's gaze met hers, steady and certain. "Not once. This life upholding the law, protecting people who can't protect themselves, it's what I was meant to do." The conviction in his voice stirred something inside Florence. Growing up, she had never questioned the path laid out for her. Marriage to a suitable man, managing a household, perhaps engaging in acceptable charitable works. But now, having glimpsed a different kind of life during her time at the ranch and with Cole, she wondered what might be possible beyond those narrow confines. "What about you?" Cole asked, breaking into her thoughts. "Before all this happened, what did you want for your life?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever really asked what she wanted before. "I suppose I expected to follow my father's plans," she admitted. "He wanted me to marry someone in banking or business, someone who could continue his legacy. I never really." She hesitated, the truth of her words striking her for the first time. "I never really thought about what I wanted." Cole studied her face. And now, Florence smiled ruefully, now I'm not sure what's possible anymore. If we manage to bring Hargrove to justice, recover my father's assets, which seems increasingly unlikely, perhaps I could rebuild something of the life I had. If not, she trailed off, uncertain. You could do anything, Cole said quietly. I've watched you these past weeks at Catherine's. You're smart, adaptable, stronger than you know. The West is full of possibilities for those brave enough to seize them. His words filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the mild spring night. Before she could respond, however, Quinn stirred, muttering something in his sleep. Cole's expression shifted back to watchfulness. You should try to get some rest, he said, his tone gentle but firm. Tomorrow will be another long day. Reluctantly, Florence rose. At the doorway to the small room, she paused, looking back at him. Cole, he glanced up, a question in his eyes. Thank you. Not just for today, but for seeing something in me that I'm only beginning to see myself. A smile touched his lips, reaching all the way to his eyes. It was always there, Florence. You just needed the right circumstances to discover it. With those words echoing in her mind, Florence returned to her makeshift bed. This time, sleep came more easily, her dreams filled not with pursuers, but with wide open spaces and possibilities she had never before dared to imagine. The first light of dawn filtered through the mission's empty window frames, painting patterns on the chapel floor where Cole still sat, his vigil unbroken despite the weariness that pulled at him. His wounded shoulder throbbed dully, a constant reminder of his vulnerability. Quinn had finally fallen into a genuine sleep around midnight, his earlier bravado giving way to the pain of his wound and the reality of his situation. Cole had used the quiet hours to think, planning their next steps carefully. They couldn't return to Catherine's ranch. It would be the first place Hargrove's men would look. Lerdo was equally dangerous until they knew which local officials might be in Hargrove's pocket. They needed a new destination, somewhere they could secure Quinn while reaching out to federal authorities Cole trusted. The sound of soft footsteps drew his attention to the doorway where Florence stood, her hair loose around her shoulders, her expression still soft with sleep. Despite the circumstances, Cole found himself momentarily transfixed by the sight. You didn't wake me for my turn at watch, she said, her tone gently accusatory. Cole shrugged, then winced at the movement. You needed the rest. And you didn't. Florence crossed to him, her eyes narrowing as she studied his face. You look exhausted, and your shoulder needs tending. Before he could protest, she was examining the bandage Catherine had applied, her touch gentle but firm. It's bleeding again. You've opened the wound. Cole knew better than to argue. In the short time he had known her, Florence had revealed a stubborn streak that rivaled his own. There are medical supplies in my saddlebag, he conceded. While Florence fetched the supplies, Quinn stirred, opening bloodshot eyes to glare at Cole. Water, he croaked. Cole regarded the prisoner dispassionately. Answers first, then water. Quinn licked dry lips, hatred burning in his gaze. What do you want to know? How many more of Hargrove's men are searching for us? What are his plans for Miss Parker? Quinn's cracked lips twisted in a semblance of a smile. Enough men that you won't get far. As for the lady, Hargrove's got buyers waiting across the border, high-paying customers who don't mind damaged goods. Rage flared in Cole, hot and fierce, but he kept his expression neutral. And the bank? What happened to Parker's assets? A wheeze that might have been a laugh escaped Quinn. Gone. Hargrove liquidated everything weeks ago, been moving the money south in small shipments. By now, it's probably in a bank in Mexico City. Florence returned in time to hear this, her face paling. Everything? She asked, her voice barely audible. All of it. Quinn's eyes shifted to her, a mean glint in them. Every last dollar, miss. Your daddy's bank is an empty shell. Florence's shoulders sagged briefly before she straightened, lifting her chin in defiance. The money isn't what matters. Justice for my father does. Pride swelled in Cole's chest at her resilience. He turned back to Quinn. Where is Hargrove now? San Antonio, last I knew, but he moves around. Has places in Lerdo, Eagle Pass, even up in Austin. Cole considered this information. Hargrove was cautious, mobile. That made him harder to pin down, but also suggested he was worried about something or someone. One last question, Cole said. Why did Hargrove partner with Parker in the first place? What was his real interest in the bank? Quinn hesitated, and Cole could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, what to reveal, what to hold back as leverage. The bank was a way to move money, Quinn finally admitted. Clean money from dirty sources. Parker never knew. He was just a respectable front for Hargrove's other businesses. Florence inhaled sharply. My father would never have been part of anything illegal. That's why he had to die, Quinn said bluntly. He started asking questions about certain accounts, transfers that didn't add up. Hargrove couldn't risk him going to the authorities. Cole's head snapped up. Are you saying William Parker was murdered? Quinn shrugged, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounded arm. Pneumonia is convenient. Easy to help along with the right medicine mixed wrong. The revelation hung in the air, devastating in its implications. Florence had gone very still, her face blank with shock. Water, Quinn demanded again. I've answered your questions. Cole nodded to Florence, who poured water from a canteen into a tin cup with mechanical movements, her mind clearly elsewhere. She handed it to Quinn without looking at him, then walked out of the chapel into the courtyard. Cole watched her go, concern etched on his features. After ensuring Quinn was securely bound, he followed her outside. Florence stood in the center of the overgrown courtyard, her back to him, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if holding something inside that might escape. Florence, he said softly, approaching. She turned, and the raw pain in her eyes nearly broke him. He killed my father, she said, her voice eerily calm. All this time I thought it was natural, that I'd lost him to illness, but it was murder. Cole reached for her, hesitating only briefly before drawing her into his arms. She remained stiff for a moment, then collapsed against him, her body shaking with silent sobs. I'm so sorry, he murmured into her hair, holding her as gently as his injured shoulder would allow. But we'll make sure Hargrove pays for what he's done. I promise you that. Florence drew back slightly, looking up at him with tear-stained eyes that held a new resolve. Yes, we will, whatever it takes. The determination in her voice matched his own feelings exactly. This was no longer just about justice, it was personal for both of them. Hargrove had murdered her father and tried to sell her like property. He had sent men to kill Cole and threatened his family. It was time to end Hargrove's reign of terror, no matter the cost. As they stood together in the mission courtyard, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky, Cole made a decision. We need to get to Fort Davis, he said. The army post there has a telegraph office and the commander is a friend. He can contact federal authorities directly, people I trust who won't be in Hargrove's pocket. Florence nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. How far? 2 days hard ride. We'll need to be careful, stay off the main trails. And Quinn, Cole's expression hardened. He comes with us. His testimony could be valuable if we can keep him alive long enough to give it. The practicalities of their situation helped Florence regain her composure. Together, they prepared for the journey, checking supplies, tending to the horses, and changing Cole's bandage. His wound looked angry and inflamed, but there was no sign of serious infection yet. You should let me stitch it again, Florence said, concern evident in her voice. Cole shook his head. No time. It'll hold until Fort Davis. They have a proper doctor there. By mid-morning they were ready to depart. Quinn, securely bound to his horse, rode between them, Cole leading the way, Florence bringing up the rear to prevent any attempted escape. They traveled in silence for the most part, each lost in their own thoughts. Cole's mind worked through their options, planning routes and contingencies. Occasionally, he would glance back at Florence, struck by the change in her since their first meeting. The refined banker's daughter was still there in her straight posture and graceful movements, but there was a new hardness to her jaw, a sharpness in her gaze that spoke of lessons hard learned. She had been forced to adapt to survive, and she had done so with remarkable resilience. The admiration he had felt from the beginning had deepened into something more complex, something he wasn't yet ready to name. Around noon, they paused in the shade of a rocky overhang to rest the horses and eat a sparse meal of jerky and hardtack. Quinn, still bound but allowed to sit on the ground, watched them with calculating eyes. "You two are fools if you think you'll make it to Fort Davis," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Hargrove has men watching all the roads, all the towns." "That's why we're not taking roads," Cole replied evenly, "and staying clear of towns," Quinn snorted. "Doesn't matter, he'll find you, and when he does—" He left the threat hanging. Florence met his gaze steadily. "When he finds us, he'll be the one facing justice. For my father's murder, for your crimes, for everything." Quinn's confidence wavered slightly at her unwavering stare. "You don't understand what you're up against, miss. Hargrove isn't just some banker gone bad. He has connections all the way to the governor's office. People disappear when they cross him." "Not this time," Cole said with quiet certainty. "This time, he's the one who's going to disappear behind prison walls." They continued their journey through the heat of the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they headed northwest toward the Davis Mountains. The terrain grew more rugged, offering better cover but making travel slower. By sunset, Cole estimated they had covered perhaps 15 miles, a decent distance considering their need for caution, but not as far as he had hoped. His shoulder was a constant, throbbing presence, and he could feel fever beginning to set in, a worrying development he chose not to share with Florence. They made camp in a small canyon that offered natural protection on 3 sides, building only the smallest of fires to cook a meager supper and heat water for coffee. Quinn, secured to a sturdy mesquite tree for the night, fell into an exhausted sleep almost immediately. Florence watched Cole across the tiny fire, concern evident in her eyes. "Your fever's getting worse," she observed quietly. He didn't bother denying it. "It'll pass. I've had worse. Let me check the wound at least." Too tired to argue, Cole allowed her to examine his shoulder. The area around the stitches was red and hot to the touch, though thankfully there were no streaks of infection spreading outward. Florence cleaned it as best she could with their limited supplies, her touch gentle but sure. "You need a doctor," she said bluntly. "Fort Davis," Cole reminded her. One more day. Florence didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she settled beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence without actually touching. "You think we'll make it?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible above the gentle crackle of the fire. Cole turned to look at her, taking in her profile outlined by the flickering light. "Yes," he said with more confidence than he felt. "We'll make it." Florence's gaze remained on the fire. "And then what?" "If what Quinn said is true, my father's assets are gone. The bank is empty. I have nothing to return to in San Antonio, even if Hargrove is brought to justice." The vulnerability in her voice tugged at something deep inside Cole. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, his fingers closing around hers. "You have options, Florence, more than you might realize." She looked at him then, a question in her eyes. "The West is changing," Cole continued. "Women are building businesses, owning property, making their own way. You could do the same, or—" He hesitated, suddenly aware of how presumptuous his next words might seem, "or you could stay in Laredo." "As what?" Florence asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cole met her gaze steadily. "As whatever you want to be. The town could use someone with your intelligence, your education, and there are people there who would be glad of your company." Something shifted in Florence's expression, a softening around her eyes. "People like you?" "Yes," Cole admitted simply. "People like me." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities neither was quite ready to voice. Then Florence squeezed his hand gently before releasing it. "We should get some rest," she said, though her tone held a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Tomorrow will be another long day." As they settled for the night, Cole taking first watch despite Florence's protests about his condition, he found himself thinking of a future beyond their current danger, a future that, increasingly, he couldn't imagine without Florence Parker in it. The night passed without incident, but by morning, Cole's condition had worsened. He woke to find Florence kneeling beside him, her face tight with worry as she pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. "Your fever's higher," she said without preamble. "We need to get you to Fort Davis today." Cole nodded, struggling to sit up. Every movement sent pain lancing through his shoulder and his head pounded mercilessly. Still, he forced himself to his feet, swaying only slightly before finding his balance. "I can ride," he assured her, though the world tilted alarmingly around him. Florence looked skeptical but didn't argue. Instead, she efficiently packed their meager camp while Cole checked on Quinn, who was watching the proceedings with evident interest. "Not looking too good, Deputy," Quinn observed with a smirk. "Shame if you died out here. The lady would be all alone." Cole ignored the taunt, untying Quinn from the tree and securing him to his horse once more. "We move out in 5 minutes," he told Florence, his voice steadier than he felt. The day's journey was a blur of pain and determination for Cole. He focused on staying upright in the saddle, on putting 1 mile after another behind them, on keeping a watchful eye for any sign of pursuit. Florence rode close beside him, her worried gaze never far from his face. Around midday, they crested a rise and saw Fort Davis in the distance, a collection of adobe and stone buildings nestled against the Davis Mountains, the American flag flying high above the parade ground. "There it is," Cole said, relief evident in his voice. "Another couple of hours." But those hours proved to be the most challenging yet. Cole's fever climbed higher, and staying conscious became an increasingly difficult battle. Only his iron will and Florence's steady presence beside him kept him in the saddle. Quinn, sensing weakness, grew bolder. "You're dying, lawman," he taunted. "Won't make it to the fort. Then what will the lady do?" "Be quiet," Florence snapped, her patience finally fraying. "Or I'll gag you for the rest of the journey." Quinn subsided, though his calculating gaze remained fixed on Cole's slumped form. The sun was low in the western sky when they finally approached the fort's gates. Cole was barely conscious, swaying dangerously in the saddle. Florence rode ahead slightly, addressing the sentry with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "I need to speak with the commanding officer immediately," she called out. "Deputy Marshal Cole Yates is gravely injured, and we have a prisoner who requires secure holding." The mention of Cole's name worked like a charm. Within minutes, they were inside the fort, surrounded by soldiers who helped Cole from his horse and took charge of Quinn. A stern-faced officer approached, concern evident in his expression as he recognized Cole. "Major Bradford," Cole managed through gritted teeth. "Good to see you." "Yates, you look like hell," the major replied bluntly. "What's happened?" Florence stepped forward. "Deputy Yates was wounded protecting me from men working for Victor Hargrove. The prisoner is one of them. We need a telegraph sent to federal authorities immediately." The major assessed her quickly, noting her determination despite her disheveled appearance. "And you are Florence Parker, daughter of William Parker of the Frontier Bank in San Antonio. I'm a witness to Hargrove's crimes." Understanding dawned in the major's eyes. "The trafficking operation." "We've heard reports." He turned, barking orders to his subordinates. "Get Yates to the infirmary immediately. Secure the prisoner in the guardhouse, and prepare the telegraph for urgent communications." As soldiers rushed to comply, Florence stayed close to Cole as they helped him toward the infirmary. His face was alarmingly pale beneath his tan, his eyes glassy with fever. "Stay with me," she murmured, her hand finding his as they walked. "We made it, Cole. We're safe now." His fingers tightened weakly around hers. "Told you we would," he managed, attempting a smile that was more grimace than grin. The fort's doctor, a competent-looking man with gray at his temples, took charge the moment they entered the infirmary. "Put him there," he directed the soldiers, pointing to a clean bed. "Miss, I'll need to examine him immediately." Florence reluctantly released Cole's hand, stepping back to allow the doctor room to work. A kind-faced older woman, the doctor's assistant, guided her to a chair nearby. "Let the doctor do his job," she said gently. "Your friend is in good hands now, friend." The word seemed inadequate for what Cole had become to her over these past weeks. Protector, certainly. Partner, increasingly. And something more, something she wasn't quite ready to name but could no longer deny. As the doctor cut away Cole's bandage, revealing the angry, infected wound beneath, Florence found herself praying with a fervor she hadn't felt since childhood. Cole Yates had saved her life more than once. Now, she could only hope that his own life could be saved in return. Major Bradford appeared at her side, his expression grave as he observed the doctor's work. "Miss Parker, I'd like to hear your full story while the doctor tends to Deputy Yates." "The telegraph operator is standing by to send messages to the federal authorities." Florence tore her gaze from Cole with difficulty. "Of course, but I'd like to stay close in case." "The doctor will call for you immediately if there's any change," the major assured her. "In the meantime, the best thing you can do for Deputy Yates is to ensure Hargrove is brought to justice." Recognizing the wisdom in his words, Florence allowed herself to be led to the major's office, where she provided a detailed account of everything that had happened from her father's death and Hargrove's betrayal to Cole's rescue, and their journey to Fort Davis. The major listened attentively, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. When she finished, he nodded gravely. "This corroborates information we've been gathering about Hargrove for months. With your testimony and the prisoner's, we may finally have enough to move against him." He rose, crossing to a map on the wall. "I'll send telegrams immediately to the federal marshal in Austin and to my superiors at the Department of War. Hargrove's operation crosses state and international boundaries, which makes it a federal matter." Florence felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Finally, someone in authority was listening, taking action. "How long before they respond?" "The telegraph lines are functioning well, so we should have initial responses by morning. In the meantime, you'll be safe here. No one enters or leaves Fort Davis without our knowledge." The major hesitated, then added more gently, "You should get some rest, Miss Parker. You look exhausted. I'll have quarters prepared for you, and the doctor's wife can provide clean clothing." Only then did Florence become fully aware of her appearance travel-stained, dusty, her hair a tangled mess. She hadn't properly bathed in days, had been sleeping on the ground or in abandoned buildings. Yet somehow, those concerns had seemed trivial compared to their survival. "Thank you," she said simply. "But first, I'd like to check on Cole Deputy Yates." The major nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. I'll have someone escort you back to the infirmary." When Florence returned to Cole's bedside, the doctor had finished his initial treatment. Cole lay unnaturally still, his face flushed with fever, a clean bandage covering his shoulder. "How is he?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor sighed, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. "The wound is badly infected. I've cleaned it thoroughly, applied poultices to draw out the poison, and given him medication to bring down the fever. The next 24 hours will be critical." "But he'll recover," Florence pressed, needing the reassurance. The doctor's expression was grave but not without hope. "Deputy Yates is strong and he received treatment in time. If the fever breaks by morning, his chances are good." It wasn't the absolute assurance she craved, but it was something to cling to. "May I stay with him?" The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "For a while. You should rest too, young lady. You'll be no help to him if you collapse from exhaustion." Florence took the chair beside Cole's bed, her eyes never leaving his face. In repose, with the lines of pain and worry temporarily smoothed by unconsciousness, he looked younger, more vulnerable. She reached for his hand, his skin burning against her own. "Fight, Cole," she whispered, leaning close so only he could hear, though she wasn't sure if her words reached him through the fog of fever. "Fight to come back to me. There's so much we haven't said, so much we haven't done. Please." Whether it was imagination or reality, she thought she felt his fingers tighten slightly around hers. Taking it as a sign of hope, Florence settled in for her vigil, prepared to stay as long as the doctor would allow. Hours passed. The doctor's wife, Mrs. Reynolds, brought clean clothing and a basin of warm water, allowing Florence to wash and change without leaving Cole's side for more than a few minutes. Food appeared at regular intervals, which she ate mechanically, barely tasting it. Night fell, and still Cole's fever raged. The doctor checked on him hourly, his expression growing more concerned as the hours passed. Florence refused all suggestions that she retire to the quarters prepared for her, stubbornly maintaining her position at Cole's bedside. Around midnight, Cole began to mumble in his delirium, fragments of sentences that made little sense. Once he called out for his father. Later he spoke of Catherine, worry evident even in his unconscious state. And several times he said Florence's name, his tone shifting from urgent warning to something softer, more intimate. Each time Florence squeezed his hand, murmuring reassurances. "I'm here, Cole, I'm safe. We're at Fort Davis. You need to get well." Dawn was breaking when the crisis finally came. Cole's fever spiked dangerously high, his body rigid with tension, his breathing labored. The doctor, who had been dozing in a chair nearby, was immediately at his side, barking orders for cold compresses, additional medication. Florence found herself gently, but firmly moved aside as the doctor and his assistant worked. She stood at the foot of the bed, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white, silently pleading with whatever higher power might be listening to spare this man who had come to mean so much to her. Time seemed to stretch and compress, minutes feeling like hours as the medical team battled for Cole's life. And then, quite suddenly, a change came over him. His breathing eased, his rigid posture relaxed, and a sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. "The fever's breaking," the doctor announced, relief evident in his voice. "I think the worst is past." Florence sagged against the bed frame, tears of relief springing to her eyes. "He'll recover," the doctor nodded, a smile finally crossing his tired face. "Barring any unexpected setbacks, yes. He's a fighter, your deputy. Your deputy." The simple phrase sent a flutter through Florence's heart. Yes, in some indefinable way, Cole had become hers, just as she had become his. Not as possessions, she had experienced that terrible fate, too recently, to ever accept such a relationship, but as two people whose lives had become inextricably intertwined by circumstance and choice. As the doctor and his assistant left to tend to other patients, Florence reclaimed her chair beside Cole. His face was peaceful now, the fever flush receding, his breathing deep and regular in natural sleep. "I'm still here," she whispered, taking his hand once more. "And I'll be here when you wake." Exhaustion finally caught up with her, and Florence dozed in the chair, her head resting on the edge of Cole's bed, their fingers still intertwined. She awoke to the sensation of someone gently stroking her hair. Opening her eyes, she found Cole awake, watching her with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "Good morning," he said, his voice hoarse but stronger than she had dared to hope. "Cole," she breathed, straightening in the chair. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," he admitted with a weak smile, "but alive. Thanks to you." Florence shook her head. "The doctor got me here in time because you kept me in the saddle," Cole finished. "Don't sell yourself short, Florence. You saved my life as surely as I saved yours that night in Lerdo." The simple acknowledgement of their equal partnership meant more to Florence than flowery declarations ever could. She smiled, squeezing his hand. "We're even then." "Not quite," Cole said, his expression turning serious. "You stayed all night from what the doctor told me earlier. You didn't have to do that." Florence met his gaze steadily. "Yes, I did, because—" She hesitated, gathering courage, then continued softly, "because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you, Cole Yates." Something flared in his blue eyes, hope, tenderness, and a deeper emotion that made her heart race. "Florence," before he could continue, the door to the infirmary opened, and Major Bradford entered, followed by a tall, distinguished man in the formal attire of a federal official. "Deputy Yates, Miss Parker," the major greeted them, relief evident in his expression as he saw Cole awake and alert. "This is Judge Harrington from the federal court in Austin. He's here in response to our telegrams." Florence reluctantly released Cole's hand, rising to greet the newcomer properly. The moment for personal revelations had passed, replaced by the urgent business of justice. Judge Harrington wasted no time on pleasantries. "I've reviewed your statements and the evidence gathered by Major Bradford's men. Combined with information already in our possession, it's enough to issue warrants for Victor Hargrove and his associates. Federal marshals are moving to arrest him as we speak." The news was everything they had hoped for, yet somehow Florence felt oddly detached, as if watching the resolution of someone else's story. After weeks of danger and uncertainty, the sudden shift toward justice seemed almost unreal. "Quinn?" Cole asked, his professional instincts asserting themselves despite his weakened condition. "Has he provided additional information?" "Quite a lot," the judge confirmed. "Once he understood the extent of the charges against him, he became remarkably cooperative. It seems he has no desire to hang for Hargrove's crimes." "And what of my father's bank?" Florence asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind since Quinn's revelation about Hargrove's theft. The judge's expression sobered. "I'm afraid much of the money is indeed gone, transferred through a series of complex transactions designed to hide its destination. However, we've frozen what assets we could find. There may be something to salvage, though likely not the full extent of your father's holdings." Florence nodded, having expected as much. "Thank you for your honesty, Judge. What happens now?" "Hargrove will be brought to Austin for trial once he's apprehended. We'll need both of you to testify, of course." The judge glanced at Cole's bedridden state. "Though that will have to wait until Deputy Yates is recovered." "How long?" Cole asked, frustration evident in his voice. The doctor, who had entered during the conversation, answered firmly, "At least 2 weeks before you're fit to travel, Deputy. That wound was serious, and you very nearly died from the infection. Push yourself too soon and you'll suffer a relapse." Cole looked ready to argue, but a pointed look from Florence silenced him. 2 weeks, he agreed reluctantly. The judge nodded, satisfied. "That will give us time to gather additional evidence and prepare the case properly. In the meantime, Miss Parker, you'll remain under protection here at the fort. We can't rule out the possibility that some of Hargrove's associates might still pose a threat." After the judge and Major departed, promising to return later with additional details, Florence resumed her seat beside Cole. 2 weeks, she mused. It feels strange to suddenly have time after running for so long. Cole reached for her hand again, his touch warm but no longer fevered. "Time for what was interrupted earlier," he said quietly. Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Yes, you said you couldn't bear the thought of losing me," Cole reminded her. "I feel the same way about you, Florence. These past weeks, they've changed me. Changed how I see my future." Her heart beating faster, Florence leaned closer. "How do you see it now?" Cole's gaze was steady, certain. "With you in it, if that's what you want too." The simplicity of his declaration, free from flowery words or grand promises, touched Florence deeply. This was Cole, honest, direct, offering his heart as plainly as he stated facts. "It is," she whispered, her own certainty matching his. "I don't know exactly what my future holds anymore, whether I'll rebuild in San Antonio or start something new. But I know I want you beside me, whatever path I choose." Cole's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds after a storm, warm, brilliant, full of promise. "Then we'll figure it out together." He tugged gently on her hand, drawing her closer. Florence went willingly, leaning down until their faces were inches apart. When their lips finally met, it felt like coming home to a place she hadn't known. She was seeking, safe, right, filled with possibilities. The kiss was brief, tender, mindful of Cole's weakened state, but it sealed a promise between them more binding than any formal vow. When Florence finally pulled back, she saw her own joy reflected in Cole's eyes. "Together," she agreed, her heart full to bursting. "Whatever comes next." 2 weeks stretched into 3 as Cole's recovery progressed more slowly than he would have liked. The wound healed clean, but regaining his strength took time. Florence remained constantly at his side, reading to him, helping with gentle exercises prescribed by the doctor, and simply talking, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes, the small details that lovers exchange when building a foundation for the future. News arrived regularly from Austin. Hargrove had been apprehended attempting to flee to Mexico, and evidence continued to mount against him. The trial was set for the following month, with both Cole and Florence scheduled as key witnesses. By the time they were cleared to travel, autumn was painting the landscape in golds and reds. They journeyed to Austin under escort, no longer fugitives but honored witnesses in what newspapers were calling the banking scandal of the decade. The trial lasted 2 weeks, drawing crowds and press coverage from as far away as Chicago and New York. Florence testified with quiet dignity about her father's murder and her own ordeal. Cole provided evidence of the trafficking operation with the professional detachment of a lawman. Though his protective glances toward Florence when Hargrove's attorney Cross examined her betrayed the depth of his feelings. In the end, the verdict was swift and severe. Victor Hargrove was sentenced to hang for murder and multiple counts of kidnapping and trafficking. His associates received lengthy prison terms. Justice, so long delayed, was finally served. As they stood on the courthouse steps after the sentencing, Florence felt a curious lightness, as if a weight she had carried for months had finally been lifted. "It's over," she said softly, gazing up at the clear Texas sky. Cole's arm slipped around her waist, a public declaration of their relationship that would have been scandalous in her previous life, but felt entirely natural now. "One chapter is," he agreed, "but we have many more to write." Florence leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I've been thinking about what comes next," she said. "The judge says they've recovered enough of my father's assets to provide a modest sum. Not wealth, but enough to start something new." "And what would you like to start?" Cole asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Florence smiled, the plan she had been considering for weeks finally taking shape in words. "A school, I think, in Laredo, for girls who might otherwise never receive an education. I was fortunate in my upbringing, but so many young women have no such opportunities." Cole's expression was one of pride and admiration. "You'd be excellent at that. Laredo needs educated women as much as it needs lawmen." "Speaking of which," Florence said, turning to face him fully, "Marshal Thomas's offer is still open." "The one he mentioned in his letter," Cole nodded. "Chief Deputy for the Laredo District. More responsibility, slightly better pay. A chance to build something lasting in the community." "Then we'll both be building," Florence observed. "A school and a more effective marshal's office. Laredo won't know what hit it." Cole laughed, the sound rich and warm in the autumn air. "Is that a yes, then? You'll come back to Laredo with me?" Florence pretended to consider, though her mind had been made up for weeks. "On one condition," she said finally, her tone serious though her eyes danced with happiness. "Name it," Cole replied, equally serious. "That you make an honest woman of me, Deputy Yates. Catherine would never forgive us if we lived in scandal, and I have a reputation to maintain if I'm to be a schoolmistress." The proposal, for that's what it was, though unconventional in its delivery, caught Cole by surprise. His eyes widened briefly before crinkling with delight. "Florence Parker," he said, taking both her hands in his, "nothing would make me happier than to make you my wife, though I believe I'm supposed to be the one asking." Florence smiled impishly. "The West is changing, remember. Women are making their own way." "So they are," Cole agreed, pulling her closer. "And I wouldn't have it any other way." They were married 2 days later in a simple ceremony at the small church near the courthouse, with Judge Harrington officiating and a surprisingly emotional Marshal Thomas standing as Cole's witness. Catherine, now mother to a healthy baby boy, traveled from the ranch with her husband Tom to stand with Florence. As they exchanged vows, Florence reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From the terror of that night outside Laredo when Cole had cut her bonds and said those fateful words, "You're free now," to this day, when she freely bound herself to him in love, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Freedom, she had learned, wasn't about the absence of bonds but about choosing which bonds to honor. And in choosing Cole, in choosing a life of purpose in Laredo, she had found a freedom deeper and more meaningful than she had ever known. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Harrington declared, his formal tone softening with genuine pleasure. "You may kiss your bride, Deputy." As Cole's lips met hers, sealing their union before God and their small circle of friends, Florence knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning of their story, a story of love, purpose, and the extraordinary things ordinary people could accomplish when they stood together against injustice. 1 year later, the Lairdo School for Girls opened its doors on the main street, just a block from the marshal's office where Chief Deputy Cole Yates maintained order in the growing border town. Florence Yates, as she was now known, welcomed 20 students that first day, daughters of ranchers, merchants, and laborers, all eager for the education that might open doors previously closed to them. From her desk, Florence could see through the window to where Cole occasionally passed on his rounds, tipping his hat to her with a smile that still made her heart skip a beat. Their small house on the edge of town was a haven of happiness, and whispers around town suggested it might soon welcome a new addition to their family. The shadows of the past hadn't disappeared entirely. Sometimes Florence still woke in the night, momentarily disoriented, reaching for Cole to reassure herself that they were safe. But those moments grew rarer as the months passed, replaced by the steady rhythms of their shared life and the knowledge that they had built something meaningful from the ashes of tragedy. As Florence turned back to her classroom, to the bright faces of girls who represented the future of the West, she thought again of those words that had changed everything. "You're free now." Cole had cut the ropes that bound her that night, never knowing he was actually cutting her free from the narrower life she had been raised to expect, opening the door to a bigger world of possibility, purpose, and love. And in that freedom, they had both found home.